One of the most famous questions in all of Parshanut is found in this morning's parasha, this week's parasha of Behar. The question of Ma inyan shmita etzel Har Sinai. Why is it that of all of the mitzvot in the Torah, the only one singled out as specifically having been given at Sinai is the mitzvah of Shemitah? And while there are many answers that have been suggested, today I want to share with you just two, both offered by the late Rabbi Mordechai Rogov Zatzal, a former Rosh HaYeshiva of our yeshiva. The first is found in Rabbi Rogov's Sefer, Ateret Mordechai, where he suggests that the reason the Torah connected Sinai and Shemitah is because they both represent something very special and very unique, the attribute of unity. In terms of Sinai, we're all familiar with its power of achdut, something attested to by the word vayichan, a verb which means encampment, and is in the singular and not plural because when the Jews encamped at Sinai, they found themselves transformed from a loosely aligned mass to a single, unified nation, which was, noted Rabbi Rogov, also the consequence of a Shemitah year, because Shemitah was the great equalizer. It was a time when we not only had to care for the less fortunate, but also shared in some of their plight, as we too had to live without planting or harvesting, and as all of our crops became ownerless, available to all. And therefore suggested Rabbi Rogov that Shemitah was an opportunity to reclaim the glory of Sinai, the majesty of when we were ke'ish echad belev echad, united in purpose and in mind. Ma'inyan Shemitah etzel Har Sinai, according to Rabbi Rogov, it was to remind us that as a result of Shemitah, there was a greater sense of community, of shared destiny, and a renewed commitment to one another, which may sound like a utopian dream. And yet, 54 years ago, this coming Monday, on June 7th, Kavchet Iyar, many of us experienced it for ourselves as Tzahal liberated the old city of Yerushalayim, and all of the Jewish people celebrated as a single nation with renewed commitment to one another. And therefore, it was a day, and it is a day, and a time we need to remember. Not only the miracles of those 6 days, and they were many, and not only because the Kotel was liberated, but because 54 years ago, we were liberated. We, Jews throughout the world, found new pride and new courage, new strength and new faith. And so we need to take a few minutes and tell the stories. Remember that in the days immediately after the Kotel was liberated, everyone came. And as the Jerusalem Post reported then, every section of the population was represented. Kibbutz members and soldiers rubbing shoulders with Niturei Karta, mothers and children in prams, and old men who trudged up Mount Zion, supported by youngsters on either side to see the Kotel. Hundreds and thousands made it in those first days. In fact, on that Shavuot, more than 200,000 people went to the Kotel within just 13 hours. As the Post continued, some wept, but most faces were wreathed in smiles as a colorful variety of all peoples trudged along in perfect order, stepping patiently when told to do so at each of the 6 successive barriers set up by the police to regulate the flow. In fact, One of the few who did not get to the Kotel in the early hours, surprisingly, was Zalman Shazar, the president of the state of Israel. Uzi Narkis, the commanding officer who liberated Yerushalayim, in his book, Jerusalem is One, tells the story of how the president's visit was arranged. The phone rang, and on the line was the president's military aide, Colonel Ari Raz. Listen, Uzi, the president wants to visit the wall. That's out of the question, said Narkis. There are still snipers, and the mop-up operation is not complete. But Raz refused to take no for an answer, ultimately bringing Narkis to the president. Shazar shook his hand, congratulated him on the victory, and said, everybody has been to the Kotel. It's inconceivable that the president hasn't. But, sir, they're still shooting. How can we endanger the life of the president of Israel? Don't worry. I'll wear a helmet, said Shazar. But, sir, responded Narkis, of all of the security arrangements in the world, can't stop a bullet. It was then that Shazar's face became stern. His eyebrows arched, and he looked Narkis straight in the eye and said, young man, pay attention. The president of the state of Israel must go to the Kotel. I'm not talking about Zalman Shazar. He's already an old man. What he could do in his life, he's already done. It's not important whether he lives or dies. But the president of the state of Israel must go to the Kotel. It's in your hands. I ask you to consider what security arrangements can be made for the president, and then give me your estimate of the risk involved. If it's too serious, I won't go. Pentismachna benot plishtim, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice. But if the risk is not too great, then the president will go up to the wall. Wrote Narkis, I was dumbstruck, but I responded, Your Excellency, when will you be ready to go? Immediately. And he did, joining the throngs of Jews who stood together in awe before the stones of the Kotel. Asked Rav Moshe Tzvi Neria Zatzal, the founder of Yeshivot Bnei Akiva, why did we lose Yerushalayim during the War of Independence in 1948, only to recapture it in 1967? The answer, he said, is found in the statement of Chazal, Yerushalayim abnuya ke'ir shechubra layachdav, that the built Jerusalem is like a city united, a city, said Chazal, shemechaberet Yisrael zeh lazeh, that unites all of Israel together. In 1948, said Rav Neryam, when the Palmach broke through Shar Tzion and the Etzel attempted to enter through Shar Shechem, we were divided. As a result, Yerushalayim could have become a source of dispute. But Yerushalayim lo nitchalka l'shvatim, Jerusalem can never be such a source. Rather, it must bring peace into the world. And therefore, we lost our chance, and we lost the old city. But now, when we entered through the Shar Arayot, a single gate, when we were united with a national unity government, with a united army, and with all of the Jews in the diaspora standing behind us, now we have merited to behold this great miracle. The one who brings back his divine presence to Tzion, Amachazir Shchinato Tzion, has brought us back to Yerushalayim. Which brings me to the second explanation that Rabbi Rogoff offered, one that I heard several years ago from Rabbi Barry Robinson Zatzal, and an explanation that focuses not on the Shemitah year, but on the mitzvah itself. Because when Shemitah was given to us at Sinai, it was a command that could not be fulfilled for 60 years. First, there were the 40 years in the desert, and then 14 years of conquest and settling the land. And then, and only then, did the Jews begin to count the cycle of the years, which after 6 more years was finally complete, and time for the very first Shemitah. And yet, despite all of those years, the Jews cherished this mitzvah, this commandment, and anticipated its arrival. For 60 years, they looked forward to the day when Shemitah could finally be part of their lives. And that, said Rabbi Rogoff, was such a spectacular expression of faith that the Torah wanted us to take note, to make sure that we understood that despite the fact that Shemitah was given at Sinai, nevertheless, the Jews believed, and they waited each and every day for 60 years to finally fulfill that mitzvah, which is also the lesson we need to hold on to this Yom Yerushalayim, when we, please God, will celebrate once again, but unfortunately, so many others will not even remember. And that is that we must never lose hope, must never forget what once was and what can be. We must hold on to this glorious day forever. Former Yeshiva University president Richard Joel often told the story of when he worked for Hillel, and he took one of the first groups of students on a birthright trip. One midnight, he recalled, they went to the Kotel, and after they spoke for a few minutes about the meaning of that place, the students were given 20 minutes or so to be by themselves at the Kotel. As his bus was loading, one of the women students, with tears streaming down her face, asked if she could have the mic and speak to the other students on the bus. And this is what she said. When I went down to the wall and I touched the stones, I was surprised to feel how smooth they were. But I realized that they had been caressed by generations, by our parents and our grandparents, and they had been smoothed by generations of tears. But then as I looked higher up, I saw that the stones were rougher and more ragged. And then I realized that what we have to do, we have to reach higher. We all have to reach higher. And that might be the second lesson of Shemitah, and the current lesson of Yom Yerushalayim, that we have to reach higher to regain the achdut, the unity we experienced 54 years ago. And we need to reach higher to protect our sacred city, and reach higher to remind ourselves and others how our lives were changed forever on that 28th day of Iyar, 1967. And then we need to reach higher even more. Said David HaMelech, Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. May we continue to seek the peace of Yerushalayim. May we continue to celebrate Yerushalayim. May this Monday be a day of celebration that brings all the Jewish people once again together as we continue to reach higher, and maybe even a little higher as well. Shabbat Shalom.